In this lesson, we're going to be talking about moving toward a healthy spirituality. So you have to come alive to the moment. The patients have examined the circumstances and the implications of their religious addiction and abuse. Their work on the issues that contributed to their dysfunctional belief system is preparing them for that healthy engagement with God, not the old God of their diseased thinking, but this new God to whom, they can shout a wholehearted yes. Becoming more adequately prepared for this requires clearing away the negative, the shaming messages and beliefs of the past, and really replacing them with those messages and beliefs that nurture and express our positive creativity. It really requires just letting go of those dysfunctional qualities we once attributed to God and replacing them with healthy ones. We reflect the God of our understanding. So if the belief system that we embrace is judged and condemning, we're going to judge and condemn others or ourselves. And if we believe in a compassionate and forgiving God, then we're going to be compassionate and forgiving. We behave according to our beliefs. So in To have or to be, Erich Fromm noted, thus our religious attitude may be considered an aspect of our character structure, for we are what we are devoted to. And what we are devoted to is what motivates our conduct. Often, however, individuals are not even aware of the real objects of their personal devotion, and they mistake those official beliefs for their real, though secret, religion. If, for instance, a man worships power while professing a religion of love, the religion of power is his secret religion, while his so-called official religion, for example, Christianity, is only an ideology. So in making the distinction between our secret religion and our official ideology, Fromm has hit upon the source of much of the hypocrisy that marks addiction to any religion or belief system or code of ethics. I often hear the complaint that, religious addicts clearly do not practice what they preach. And as Fromm explains it, this is because what they believe and what they preach are not the same. They may not be practicing what they preach, but they are definitely practicing what they believe. And this is probably why religious addicts don't see the hypocrisy in preaching about a loving and forgiving God and being judgmental and intolerant. They don't believe in a loving God. Deep down, they truly believe God is angry and wrathful and judging. Or perhaps they secretly worship power and control. Religion is the means that they use to get it. So, recovery from religious addiction and abuse really requires us to examine our deepest beliefs and motivates us with utmost honesty to see where our behaviors and our ideologies don't match. Then we have to take the steps to bring them into alignment so that our insides match our outsides. And this means abandoning our old dysfunctional beliefs about what God is like and replacing them with healthy ones. So here the use of affirmation becomes really effective. They serve as the replacing tool that you can really use to exchange unhealthy beliefs and those behaviors for new ones. And I often hear those old beliefs referred to as old tapes. So consistent use of affirmations really erases those old messages and it records a healthier one in its place. And you should really take care, however, that you don't use affirmations unhealthily or compulsively. Affirmation should always enhance some positive quality about yourself, as well as affirming your own choices and responsibility. I often hear people say there are no mistakes as an affirmation. Statements like this actually reinforce a lack of responsibility along with some magical thinking. The statement, I am a positive, creative person, is an affirmation. So we're going to be using affirmations and other exercises as we explore ways to create a healthy spirituality. And it's been said that the qualities we exhibit in our lives often reflect the qualities that we attribute to God. So likewise, we may examine many of the qualities usually attributed to God to see how we might apply them to our lives. There are 4 such qualities that increasingly reflect healthy spirituality, and the more that we develop them in our lives, they are truth, energy, love, and acceptance. And I've provided a handout in the lesson that goes into more depth about the concepts and the practical applications of those values and the qualities, as well as some affirmations that you can teach your clients for each one. When someone converts to a new religion, in the back of their head, there's always this burning question of, what if they're right? And it's a valid, fearful question, only in the context of all that they and being right means to you. So ask yourself, who are they? Does the word refer to the authority figures who seek to stay in power by keeping you subjugated in shame and fear? Do they forbid you to question and explore? Do they resist change and insist on rigid dogma? And then perhaps they might be religious abusers. And I've asked myself the same question. What if I'm wrong? Well, if I'm wrong, then God, after all, is an angry, wrathful, unforgiving, bloody tyrant who is definitely to be feared. I cannot, do not, and will not believe in such a God. I've abandoned the trappings that might have led me to serve such a God, because believing in that kind of God kept me sick and power-hungry, egotistical and drunk. I have fired that God. In the passage from The Color Purple that I really find so moving, Celie has described her God as this bigoted old white man. And Shug shares her view of God as it, an entity that depends as much on pleasing us as on our pleasing it. And Shug offers Celie a way to find a God that she can trust. But, Celie's not sure. She says, well, us talk and talk about God, and I'm still adrift, trying to chase that old white man out of my head. I've been so busy thinking about him, I never truly notice nothing God make. Not a blade of corn. How it do that? Not the color purple. Where it come from? Not the little wildflowers. Nothing. So Shug gives her this suggestion. Whenever that old image comes up, tell him to get lost. Conjure up flowers, wind, water, a big rock. And then Celie said, but this is hard work, let me tell you. He been there so long, he don't want to budge. He threatened lightning and floods and earthquakes. Us fight. I hardly pray at all. Every time I conjure up a rock, I throw it. So, like Celie, before someone can say yes to God, before you can invite in a new God, any new God-like qualities, you really have to get rid of the old God who keeps the committee in your head whispering, what if they're right? You have to let go of those old attributes that made you fear and hate God. You need to figuratively throw rocks at your image of God as an angry old man. You need to fire that old God. So I've described some of the techniques for beginning to find a new spirituality that requires writing letters to your body, your mind, and your feelings. when clients are ready to let go of those old dysfunctional beliefs and the God who manifests them, there's an exercise on the second handout in this lesson that can really help your client more actively into recovery, where the client will write a letter to their old God and include a ceremony as well as some affirmations that they can tell themselves and a meditation exercise you can use with them. So, how does one abstain from religious addiction? Alcoholics quit drinking and drug addicts can just say no. But for religious addicts, kind of like food addicts or sex addicts, it's not so simple. You're not abstaining so much as you're working towards balance and structure. You can't cut God out of your life any more than food addicts can stop eating or sex addicts can give up having relationships. So letting go of that dysfunctional God is not always going to be as easy as just simply writing a letter. And as Celia observed in The Color Purple, the old God had been there so long that he doesn't want to budge. Old habits die hard. Addictive, compulsive behaviors and attitude have this lamentable tendency to pop up in other forms. So for the religious addict, there's this danger of not only abandoning their church or scripture quoting and compulsive crusade attendance, but also switching all those addictive patterns to a 12-step group. And using some of the things that I'm about to give you will really help minimize that danger. They have to build a foundation for recovery by creating balance and structure. We can't become a positive, creative person until, if we're still using something to numb or escape our feelings. A lot of the early recovery will focus on just simply not using that to which we were addicted. Alcoholics, they struggle with cravings to drink, and food addicts work through their withdrawal from sugar and flour, and they learn to use the tools that help them maintain their abstinence. So working the 12 steps really creates this framework for recovery. And some of the information the client discovers about themselves and how they function in their disease is going to help them to build that solid foundation for recovery. It's a foundation that consists of abstinence from the beliefs and the behaviors that really fed their disease. So to define sobriety or structure, one must first identify how they behaved in their disease. The charts and the journals they keep will also become tools for creating balance and structure. And through this self-examination, they can identify the bottom line behaviors and the beliefs that were the key components of their disease. And then once these are identified, they have to create a structure based on an honest self-appraisal. The behaviors and whatever triggers them must be avoided or structured. And some religious addicts, after a rigorous and honest inventory of their behavior, will choose total abstinence from all church attendance and Bible reading and so forth. Others might find themselves comfortable with structuring a one-day only attendance at religious services or meetings. And some may have to refine their structure after trying it out if situations become too dangerous. Their black and white thinking and rigidity, it might lead them to create an unrealistic structure that is still unbalanced and extreme. So selecting a sponsor who's willing to learn about their disease and what they need to recover is going to be critical for them. And like other recovering addicts, people might start feeling their feelings when they stop the compulsive behavior, especially those of loneliness and isolation and fear. And during this time, it's going to be important to have as much support and nurturing as possible. This is literally a detoxification period, which is why it's entirely appropriate for religious addicts to enter residential centers. In a lot of cases, a 28-day residential program that uses an issues-oriented approach or an issues-oriented all addictions approach is going to prove to be effective. The process of changing these long-held beliefs is very difficult. There is this fear of wondering, what if they're right? And there may also be a great sense of emptiness and loss, of wondering what's left. Treatment and ongoing therapy can really help the person to begin replacing those toxic beliefs and attitudes with healthy ones. And they can help by allowing the person to grieve the loss of the old self. This is why people relapse. They never finished that grieving process that really lets them to move on. At this stage, affirmations become critically important. In the place of scripture used as a weapon or a drug, religious addicts need affirmations like the ones that I've listed on this slide. So there's a workbook called A Gentle Path Through the 12 Steps by Patrick Carnes, and he developed a worksheet for creating sobriety in any addiction. So this is kind of an adaptive worksheet and guidelines for use in creating spiritual sobriety. So one is to identify the behaviors that manifest your addiction. If they listed the behaviors that manifested their religious addiction, they might find it helpful to refer to that again. If not, they list those behaviors now. So for instance, scripture quoting, excessive financial contributions, being judgmental, refusing to question authority, or that black and white thinking. And then number 2, they need to list at least one way each behavior hurts them or someone else physically, mentally, or emotionally. So for instance, their belief that sex is dirty might have led them to withhold sex from a spouse and to use prostitutes instead. This may have caused emotional shame and fear, mental stress and anxiety, as well as a health risk of catching a sexually transmitted disease that they may have given to their partner. And then this list is going to serve as a guide as to the severity of their abuse of that particular behavior. Some of them may want to judge everything they did during their addiction with equal harshness, but not every behavior will have affected them in all 3 ways. So they will want to give priority to those that had the greatest consequences. Those are going to become their sobriety boundaries, as Carnes calls them. Then we need to set boundaries or structure about how to use this behavior. Remember, the goal is balance. They can choose to either abandon a behavior or to safely limit it to certain circumstances. They might want to commit to eliminating that boundary for a certain amount of time. Starting small is going to reduce the anxiety around it. And then they can renegotiate the length of time that they're going to continue to refrain from the behavior. And then after a certain length of sobriety, they may find that they can structure in some limited participation for a certain length of time in order to work through any resulting feelings and issues. Later, they begin to add church activities back in, maybe seeking affiliation with a more open, affirming church or a belief system. In other cases, they might find that they can comfortably structure a balanced way to participate in an activity by limiting the amount of time or the circumstances under which they engage in it. And then they want to identify the triggers or the danger zones that might lead to relapse. Some alcoholics have no problem going to bars. Others do. Some food addicts don't mind being around their favorite binge foods. Others find the mere mention of cake can just set off their cravings. There might be certain situations or thought patterns that can tilt a person into relapse, and they need to define what those might be. Then they can indicate what action they're going to take when they're confronted with these triggers or danger zones. Anything that restricts their ability to choose or furthers their victimized belief that they're inadequate is likely to be a signal that they're heading for a relapse. Next, they want to define those behaviors that constitute a slip. So, having identified the triggers and danger zones, they're going to be better able to decide what causes a slip or a relapse. This is where reality checking with a sponsor and a support group is often necessary at first, especially if those rigid black and white thinking is, a really big problem for them. The goal here is to learn to develop their own guidelines, which allows for, growth and recovery without being so flexible as to permit them to rationalize and indulge in their addictive behaviors. So they will rarely be confronted with their all or nothing choices. They're striving for progress, not perfection. They want to learn to recognize and live comfortably with that gray area that lies between the black and white. There's no sense in setting themselves up to fail by creating a structure to which it's impossible to adhere. And the fifth one is to use affirming thoughts or behaviors that reflect healthy beliefs to replace those dysfunctional ones. Gentle self-nurturing is really essential in recovery from any addiction, especially religious addiction and abuse. You've been accustomed to living with self-condemnation, rigid rules, and judgments. And as a result, you want to reinforce the idea that you're not giving up on God, but just merely replacing that dysfunctional God or belief system with a healthy one that just permits spiritual growth. And you can do this by creating affirmations or by finding a healthy behavior that replaces that dysfunctional one. And in the lesson, you'll find a handout with a worksheet for spiritual sobriety that clients can use, as well as an example of how one client actually used this handout.